All right, we're breaking down positional units one by one here on Mark Rogers TV. We're talking Oklahoma football with Graham Dudley from Crimson and Cream Machine and talking about that defensive front for the Sooners. Graham, your defense in recent years has been much maligned in terms of what the expectations are. It's still been a good defense, but in regards to playing elite football, top 5 to 10 football, but the defense really played extremely well last year, and I think most of the nation saw that down the stretch in dominating the Big 12 and then taking on an Auburn team and really putting the clamps on the Tigers.
Sure, yeah, I think that the defense, as you said, in 2016 was the best in the Big 12, or excuse me, in 2015 was the best in the Big 12, and then last season really regressed, took a step back, especially in the early season, had some serious problems. And I know that a lot of those problems were in the back seven and not necessarily the front seven, but I think a big reason that the defensive backs were having such a hard time with teams like TCU and Texas Tech is because there just was no pass rush being generated on the front end. And of course, a lot of that is the linebacker's job in Oklahoma's 3-4 scheme. Guys like Obo Okoronkwo are expected to rush the passer, but they didn't get a whole lot of help from their defensive line either. So the defensive line last season was kind of, I know we talked earlier about the way that the offensive line really came together and was solid and was like the same 5 guys all the time. Well, the defensive line was like the opposite of that. I mean, just guys coming in and out, guys retiring due to injury or concussion, or in the case of Charles Walker, just because they didn't want to risk getting hurt anymore. So it was a really tough year for the unit, which came together surprisingly well down the stretch when you consider all the adversity that I went through. And the defensive line, like the rest of the defense, really got its act together a little bit better towards the end of the season. A lot of that has to do with guys like Neville Gallimore, a 6'3", 310 defensive tackle from Canada. He was a big part of our success last season, just a redshirt freshman who's going to be a difference maker for years to come. We also had guys in the rotation like DJ Ward and Austin Roberts, and these are Jordan Wade, and those are the names I think over the next couple of years that we're going to be looking at as the real starters for this unit. Now, the Oklahoma Sooners did make some news over the offseason saying that they are looking at moving to a 4-3 as opposed to a 3-4, which means that they're going to need extra guys on the field at all times. So it's going to be interesting to see which names really emerge and go to the front as they look at who's going to better fit that new scheme that they're looking to play this season.
When I look at the 2017 recruiting class, I see a few names pop up. I don't know if it would be hopeful that these guys get on the field, because that could either mean that they're just so talented and playing so well and picking things up that they need to be on the field, or that you've got some issues up front. Any thoughts about any of these young guys needing to be on the field this fall?
Well, I did mention one of the last times that we spoke that unfortunately, even as the defensive line unit was probably the weakest on Oklahoma's 2016 team, it was probably also the weakest in the 2017 recruiting class, which, again, unfortunate, but I think there's still some real talent there. It's just that, when you look at the rest of the recruiting class, just littered with 4-star guys, and really only one 4-star to speak of in this class. His name is Isaiah Thomas. Rivals has him listed as a weak side defensive end, and he comes out of Tulsa. And, I guess there's a chance that he could crack the rotation this year, although, to be honest, I don't really see any freshmen playing a really significant role for the defensive line unit this season. But there's some other talented names to look for in this defensive line class that we just brought in. We also took a guy named Tyreece Lott from Ardmore, who we flipped in the final weeks of recruiting. And then there's Kajaker Daly from Florida, Troy James from Louisiana, and Robert Barnes, not Robert Barnes. He's a defensive back. But yeah, just a few guys. Kajaker Daly, I think, is maybe the other name to look at. As I said, a Florida guy, a 3-star, and also a defensive end. So like I said, we're going to need more defensive line bodies on the field if we're actually going to play a 4-3. And so I guess, like I said, I don't foresee that we're going to need those guys to play a ton of snaps, but those would be the two names that I would keep an eye on in terms of maybe making a difference right out of the gate.